Welcome back, everybody. Sorry, we had a little technical glitch we're dealing with. It was like I was back with my kids listening to everybody do the countdown here in the studio. Great job, guys. So, welcome back, everybody. It's now my pleasure to welcome the Honorable Katrine Conroy, Minister of Forest, Lands and Natural Resource Operations and Rural Development, for this morning's opening keynote address. Over to you, Minister.
Can you all hear me?
Yes. Good morning.
Oh, good. Good morning. I think I've already frozen. So we've had some technical difficulties here, and I apologize for that. And I think I'm frozen on the screen, but that's okay. As long as you can hear me, that's what's important. So, and thank you so much for the introduction. And I want to recognize your respective nations, territories, and I'm really honored to be speaking to you today from the territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people of the Esquimalt and Songhees nations. And I want to thank you for including me in what is now your 6th Indigenous Resource Opportunities Conference. You know, these are really exciting times in BC. We are fighting through the pandemic, and hopefully this will be over soon and we will be together next year in person. Our economy is recovering, and in fact, BC now has more jobs, more people working than actually, we're working together, First Nations, industry, and government, to build a strong, sustainable forest sector that aligns with the Declarations Act. In June, we in our ministry released our intentions paper. It's our vision for the future of forestry in BC. We're modernizing forest policy, and it's based on the principles of reconciliation, sustainability, community participation, and innovation as our top priorities. And I'm very excited to have introduced amendments to the Forest and Range Practices Act just on Wednesday of this week. When passed, the changes will bring the intentions paper's visions, our visions, closer to reality. And the amendments will make British Columbia's approach to forests more focused on sustainability. They'll also return more benefits to people and local communities, and position BC to take full advantage of future economic opportunities. And a key part of the changes will be replacing forest stewardship plans, which are now developed by the sector, with forest landscape plans. And forest landscape plans will address ecological and cultural values in addition to timber values. And these plans will be developed through shared decision-making between government and First Nations. And I'm very happy to say this legislation formally aligns with government's commitment to shared decision-making on key decisions as embodied in the Declaration Act. And we are working government to government with First Nations to increase participation in the forest sector, from greater access to forest tenure to shared decision-making. And we're doing all of this to secure a sustainable future for Indigenous peoples, forest communities, forest workers and their families, and a renewed forest industry. And we are committed to empowering First Nations to even further develop already strong entrepreneurial skills. The successes are many so far. Since 2015, the province and 130 First Nations have signed more than 300 forestry agreements worth about $59 million. The power of First Nations drive, determination, and creativity is showing exceptional results. In the last year, the province signed 53 agreements with 75 First Nations. And in this fiscal year, it's expected another 83 agreements will be signed with 80 First Nations. These agreements in the last 2 years alone are worth just over $20 million. Each one of those agreements has immense benefits and show great diversity and ingenuity. And as you know, there are 3 funding streams used by the province to accommodate First Nations for the impact of forestry on Indigenous territories. Through the Strategic Forestry Initiative funding stream, there are 3 opportunities to pursue. There's $250,000 in funding. It's available to each First Nation for strategic land management agreements. These fund studies and analyzes for better land management decisions. The business-to-business model offers up to $250,000 per year to First Nations to build capacity for business partnerships, including with BC Timber Sales. And First Nations can also receive funding for up to $2 million for purchase agreements where forestry tenure or forestry business assets can be bought. Some examples of deals include a strategic land management agreement with the Simca. These funds are being used for a caribou recovery and road rehabilitation project in crucial winter habitat. This agreement provides jobs in an area hit by a mill closure, and it also serves as an example of how to successfully implement strategic land management and collaborative stewardship. There is a B2B agreement with the Bridge River Indian Band to establish the nation's cultural heritage assessment department. And this will help more cultural heritage and archaeological assessments to be done, which will increase the amount of timber that can be harvested. And 10-year purchase agreements worth more than $5 million were signed with the Kitsim-Kalam First Nation, the Lillooet Nation, the Shishaw Nation, and the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. And these 10-year purchases enhance First Nations participation in the forest sector. They increase First Nations' share of the provincial annual allowable cut, and they create more economic development opportunities, and they allow First Nations to have direct involvement in stewardship in their traditional territories, and they create greater certainty for decision making. They also increase partnerships with industry while providing accommodation and supporting reconciliation. And as I mentioned, innovation is one of our top priorities. That's why I'm really excited to mention just a few of the innovations being made through the Indigenous Forest Bioeconomy Program and the Indigenous Forestry Program. For example, the Nakadezalwatan, in partnership with Deadwood Innovations in Fort St. James, is working on establishing a manufacturing facility that will use timber killed by wildfires or the mountain pine beetle. More than 35 people will be employed building the facility, and new high-end products will go a long way towards storing carbon and adding value to this sort of fiber. The Takla First Nation is pursuing an ambitious and innovative net zero housing project in their community. They'll use structurally insulated panels and interior finishing products from a local mill that will be reconfigured for this project. Up to 40 structures over the next few years will be built. And the project will add value to local fiber, and it will provide hands-on training for members and create new jobs and sequester carbon. The Namgis First Nation and the Quetal First Nation and others are considering a number of projects, including firewood, salvage, secondary harvest, pulp chipping, composting methods, shavings, specialty use products, wood cants, fire logs and briquettes, pellets, greenhouses, and other options. And an interesting innovation also comes from Seven Leagues, a BC company working with First Nations on a Sea to Tree initiative. That's where tree bark is used to tan salmon skin, making a leather that's strong enough for boots. I want to get a pair of those. That's the list of innovations, studies, and partnerships and successes that goes on and on. And as you participate in today's conference, I congratulate you on your successes so far, and I hope that you continue to build on your accomplishments. As a province, we are determined to transition from high volume to high value production. And your work in shifting to a more resilient and diverse forest sector will help people by creating sustainable forestry jobs in your communities across BC. And I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all today. And I know that you've had a good day yesterday. I heard from my colleagues, and best of luck with the remainder of your conference. And I know that you have some questions that you'd like answered, and hopefully you can hear me well enough so I can answer those questions. And I'm obviously staying frozen on the screen, so sorry about that, but I'll turn it back to you, Dallas.
Thank you so much, Minister. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us this morning. And, it's exciting to hear about the growth of opportunities in the industry and the roles for First Nations people. I guess one of my questions would be, how do you see the new legislative amendments that you introduced the other day in the House lining up with UNDRIP and DRIPA, the DRIPA Act? I noticed that there's still sort of some consultative language in there around what the chief forester will be doing around these new landscape plans. And is there a vision for those to merge to where it's more around a consensus model as opposed to a consultative model?
Definitely, Dallas, and thank you for that question. So, and as you know, we're committed to reconciliation and continued engagement with First Nations rights and title holders. And through the development of the forest landscape plans, the amendments will create the opportunity for shared decision making, and that will align with government's commitments to implement the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. And they address many longstanding concerns from First Nations. I know we've talked about it, and from the First Nations Forestry Council, the First Nations Leadership Council, and it's we've talked about it with, I know staff have, the Chief Forester has, many people have talked with many nations, as I said, rights and title holders, and it'll increase transparency and management of our forests.
That's tremendous. As you know, I've spent a little time in some planning processes myself, and so we really look forward on the North Island to engaging in some of these new opportunities. I guess my next question would be around some of the tenure buyback opportunities. Do you see legislation coming in the next session or two around helping with that? I noticed that there's up to $2 million per nation slotted for that right now for some of these opportunities, but at the price of tenure in the marketplace, it's going to put a dent in the direction that we're trying to go. But I'm just more interested in how that sort of take back process is going to play out.
Yes, and we are going to be introducing changes to the Forest Act, which will help us with that, so that we can have the tools in place to move forward on that. So yes, definitely, and we've started that with some of our work with the annual allowable cut and the making sure that we're looking at trying to ensure that we're working towards making sure that there's tenure shared with Indigenous nations, the rights and title holders across the province.
That's tremendous, and I really look forward to working with your staff on further development of this. As you know, Nanwakolas Council endorsed the intentions paper because we see that as an opportunity to have all of these complicated discussions. Everybody thinks it's as simple as just saying, okay, we'll protect this and we'll harvest this. And as you know, there's so many more layers of the onion that we have to get into. And I really feel the intentions paper is one of the first strategic directions in having all the discussions that are necessary to find that path towards reconciliation in the forest industry. So I applaud you and your government on making these efforts to try, just make tomorrow a little bit easier for all of us when it comes to the management of forestry resources. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. We've seen Fairy Creek escalating to a point where it's at. We've seen the local First Nations be very clear about their intentions of taking the time to work with you and your staff around how deferrals are going to work place. Is that commitment going to extend to other parts in the province where the province and First Nations can sit down and really have a thorough discussion about how deferrals will take place and the impacts that those will have and whatnot?
Absolutely. Dallas, you're bang on. That is the intentions paper started that, and then actually, even before that, the report, the old growth report that we've committed to implementing all 14 recommendations. We're working on those recommendations, and some of those discussions have already started with nations, and we will continue to have those discussions because that was the number one recommendation in the report is those critical government to government discussions with Indigenous nations, the rights and title holders on whose traditional territory those blocks of forest land, are, so that it's critically important, and we will be moving forward with more discussions. I know some have already started, and it is so. It's so frustrating. I know for the Pachidat, the Dididat, the Hawaiiat, they came and we had those discussions and government to government on deferring the Upper Walbran and the Fairy Creek area. they had put out their message saying that they had hoped that they could be left in peace to carry on with their landscape planning, to look at their entire area, to be able to ensure that they are looking at the ecosystems, looking at the entire usage of their traditional territory. And it's incredibly frustrating that some people choose to ignore that, and we have the situation we have. So we are hoping that people will see as we move forward, like implementing all 20 of our intentions in the intentions paper, as you mentioned, which, identified that we needed to modernize forest policy. And this is one of those intentions by making the revisions to the Forest and Range Practices Act as well as to the Forest Act. And I know through the development of the 10-year forest landscape plans, we're going to be moving towards smarter management of our forests and moving towards that shared decision making with First Nations. And it'll also provide the opportunity for public and for the communities to have more input on the forest operating plans, which is what licensees will have to do. But when they do those plans on potential harvested areas, they have to do it and make sure it aligns with the forest landscape plans that have been developed in collaboration between the chief forester and the Indigenous nations. So it's very much making sure we're moving in that direction, that we're hoping that public will see that not only are we taking care of the ability to harvest, but more importantly, we're looking at the entire ecosystem. We're looking at the entire, all of forests to make sure we're looking at that, the ecosystem. We're looking at those important areas that are at risk that need to be deferred, and the trees that we want to defer. That we've talked to nations, we've talked to them about how important the cultural importance of some of those trees, and the need to save those for generations to come. And so that's critically important. And we're hoping that this will move us in the right direction, that people will see that we are taking concerns very seriously. And by moving forward, we're looking at not only the ability to harvest and have a sustainable, resilient forest industry for generations to come, but also to be able to conserve, because that's just as important with our forests.
No, that's great. I guess the one, you and I have shared calls with the people from the Globe and Mail and sort of the Anglo community, and I guess one of the challenges is managing expectations. I know we seem to have to defend a lot of poor forest practices in the past by understanding them and having those discussions to make tomorrow that much better. So I'm really, really happy to see government leaning in that direction. But maybe just as a final comment, some of your thoughts around managing those expectations so we don't end up in situations like Fairy Creek in the North Island, in the interior, and other places where forestry and First Nations need to find a better way to coexist.
Well, the work that you've done with the Coastal First Nations and Nanwakolas and on the Great Bear Rainforest is a perfect example of how well it can work when everybody's working together. And I know that in our conversations that you referred to, we had to remind people that part of the Great Bear Rainforest Agreement was 20% to be harvested by Indigenous nations, and we have to keep reminding people of that and moving forward. That the forest industry is not a sunset industry. It's an industry that's going to be here for generations to come, supporting members and nations like yours, but also that we have conserved, quite a substantial amount of the Great Bear Rainforest, and I think we can do that. I know we can do that with this legislation, working with Indigenous nations, working with the landscape plans, and we've already been doing. We've got the example from the Great Bear Rainforest and the work that you have done with the Nanwakolas and the Coastal First Nations, but also we've been doing some pilot projects with up in the Upper Island in the interior on landscape landscape plans, forest landscape plans, and it's working incredibly well. I mean, we had Chief Baptiste from the Estelle here on Wednesday, and he was talking about how beneficial it's been to his nation, and working in collaboration with the community up in Quesnel, and moving forward and on, showing that we can make this work. So we are hoping that the folks that are really concerned about conserving will recognize that this is the right direction to move in, that we can do both. And that's really important, Dallas. We can conserve and ensure that we're protecting forests for generations to come, and we can also make sure that we are harvesting and have a thriving forest industry. I like to say, with my 9 grandkids, I was a first woman to work in the forest industry in the pulp mill in the province, and I definitely in our pulp mill, and it was. I want my grandkids to have that opportunity if they want. This summer, my oldest granddaughter actually worked in the pulp mill as a summer student. She's going to college, and she was a fourth generation to work in that pulp mill in our family, and which was kind of cool. But it also, I want to make sure that my grandkids want the opportunity to walk in an old growth forest. They have that opportunity, that they will be there, they will be conserved for generations to come, but that they also have the opportunity to work in a really resilient, well-managed, sustainable forest industry.
That's wonderful. I really look forward to continuing to work with you and your staff to find these solutions that we're all looking for and that the forest definitely needs. So I want to thank you for joining us today and making the time to address our conference. And like I said, hopefully COVID will make it available for me and my chiefs to sit down with you and talk about some of the ideas we have around working with you and the new legislation and new policies that you're bringing forward. So on behalf of IROC, I'd like to thank you for being here, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Dallas, and thank you to everyone. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I too can't wait until we can do more of these meetings face to face and be able to see everybody. And I mean, I know I'm looking forward to seeing everybody at the First Nations the gathering in November, which will be very good. So yes, love to have these conversations. Quite passionate about our forests and what we can do. So really excited about it. So thank you so much. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks again.
Okay. Yeah, take care.
Take care. At this time, I'd like everybody to make their way back to the agenda tab to select the next session on our first panel of the day, strengthening communities through training and employment.